Hey YouTube, it's EvanMagician34, and I got another deck for you. This is sort of like an alpha beta version of a new Flamvell deck, because Hidden Arsenal 2 brought us all those cool new Flamvells. So now there's enough of them, I think we can actually start trying to build like a dedicated Flamvell deck. So anyway, just get right to the list. 3 copies of Flamvell Firedog. Big awesome recruiter for them. 3 copies of Magician. We got plenty of ways to play with him in this deck, lots of ways to steal things and make synchros out of nowhere, and you definitely want to get him into the grave for rekindling. So we're going all out on him in 3 copies instead of the usual 2. Another good 4-star that's not a tuner is Grunica, which obviously can also run things over, but 1700 is a little hard to kill things in straight up combat these days. So you're mainly just using him as the next biggest non-tuner 4-star. So, behind the dog, of course. And we're also running 2 copies of Flamvell Baby. He tunes in some cool ways in this deck and gives you access to things like Catastrophe, of course. And you can even sync for 7 via this guy. And his discard ability can pump either Grunica or Firedog up to be big enough to kill some interesting things. So, anyway, those are our 10 Flamvells. We also run Monk to go get access to that Magician. It pulls it out of the deck, sends it to the grave, which is all good, and of course also turns into an 8-star. And there are plenty of spells in this deck. We also have Card Trooper, ditches things to the grave, powers up Rekindling, also draws you a card and just furthers your deck. Good inclusion here. Morphing Jar, similar kind of argument. He can ditch stuff out of your hand, and this deck can just burn out its hand fairly quickly, so it's a good way to restock and try to finish things. You'll almost surely hit a Rekindling out of those 5, plus whatever card you draw after that, if you don't float them on your own turn, obviously. So, another good inclusion. Today's fast-paced meta needs some ways to slow it down. Thunder King Ryo is a great first-turn drop. And of course also is a good solid 4-star at 1900, so he can kill lots of stuff. Also running 3 copies of Kaith Shadowmark. We're going to have plenty of ways to special summon. You can even summon him after Rekindle. And he syncs, obviously, with Flamvell Baby. So there's plenty of cool things you can do with him, and the removal is nice. Still very few things actually stop him. We also run Tragoedia, great way to manipulate and get out some cool synchros in this deck. And taking damage over your guys isn't too hard to accomplish, so he's always a good card to have in hand. We also run Gores. Since you run only 2 traps in this deck actually, plenty of times when we're going to be able to drop Gores out onto an empty field. So just kind of a no-brainer. And Flamvell Baby actually also combines with this guy and with his level 7 token. So all pretty good stuff. And our last monster is, of course, Gale. Having stuff is yet another combat trick, and he syncs intriguingly in this deck too, and can mess with Tragoedia. So on and so forth. Alright. Spells are pretty self-explanatory. Heavy Storm, MST, Cold Wave. This deck has a lot of trouble with back rows that can mess you up. You don't want to get bottomless, so there's plenty of MT destruction in this deck. Brain Control. Mind Control, because we really want to take advantage of all those synchros. Also run 2 copies of Enemy Controller. It helps things like Grunica and Firedog get over other monsters. You can stall and let you sack into a Caius on your next turn. And you can also use this to do some really cool tricks via Rekindling and whatnot. So plenty of ways to use Econ in this deck. And of course it also steals things. 3 copies of Book of Moon. More stalling for your opponents and more ways your Firedog can get some kills. I'm also running 2 copies of My Body as a Shield, yet one more counter to Bottomless Trap Hole and Torrential and otherwise devastating traps. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Also works on stuff like Judge, of course. Pot of Avarice, you can stuff the grave pretty quickly. You don't want to run too much of this card, because otherwise then you'll have a hard time rekindling, but 1 copy can definitely be helpful. And the card I've been speaking of so much, we are running 3 copies of Rekindling. I haven't gotten to test this deck very much just yet, but from what I have tested it, I've never been sad to see Rekindling. Even if you're only Rekindling for 1, it's still that 1 free monster to go the normal summon from your hand for a synchro, or to feed Caius or something like that. So always a good card. I've never been disappointed by it, and it's never stacked up in my hand yet. So, excellent card to include. It's pretty much the whole premise of Flamvells. And my 2 traps are Royal Decrees, because you don't mind if it's just down to spells and monsters. So anyway, it's the main board. The extra is pretty straightforward. I'm running my Field Marshal here, not Mistworm, because by the time you summon up the Mistworm, anything you really wanted to bounce that the Field Marshal can't kill would have gone off, like Bottomless or Torrential or whatever. And if all that's left is monsters, this guy can deal with more than Mistworm can usually. It is kind of just a taste choice, and Mistworm has his moments, but 9 times out of 10 I think this guy's probably the better bet. So, for this deck, anyway. But you can certainly run Mistworm if you want to. 8 stars is a popular target in this deck, and Stardust Dragon protects Decree, so 2 Stardusts. Red Dragon Arcfiend. Your other 8-star of choice, more likely than not, is going to be Colossal, for all the obvious reasons. He's just a great big beat stick if nothing else fails. Still running that 1 copy of Thought Ruler. Black Rose Dragon. Especially nice to follow up Black Rose with Rekindling, by the way. We also run Armor Master. We do have Gale. Urbellum. Glow Guardian. Bryanek. Magical Android. I have Justice Cataster. And for those pesky gadget decks, of course, Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. Alright, so that's the deck. And until next time, rate, comment, subscribe, and of course enjoy.